Lord.
This is the Subcommittee on International Human Rights of the Standing Committee on Foreign Affairs and International Development. Today is January 27th, 2015, and this is our 51st meeting. We will be pursuing our study of the aftermath of the Rwandan genocide of 1994.
Much sought after, a long sought after witness. We've wanted to have Sue Montgomery here for some time, and we finally succeeded. So that's a wonderful gift to us. Ms. Montgomery works for the Montreal Gazette. She's got considerable insight into the Rwanda situation. And Ms. Montgomery, what we'll do today is, normally we ask for a presentation of about 10 minutes, but that's at your discretion. When you're completed, we'll then turn the floor over to our members to ask questions. The length of each question and answer is determined by taking the total membership of the committee and dividing it by the amount of time that's left. So, in other words, the length of your presentation to some degree determines the length of your answers. So, at any rate, I'll turn things over to you. Please feel free to commence. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you for inviting me, and thank you for looking into this very important issue that's often ignored. I was able to travel to Rwanda last year after having been there a few times before teaching journalism, but this time I was going as a journalist. And I applied for and received funding from the Canadian Institutes for Health Research to do my stories. And unfortunately, that journalism grant has been cut, so that might be a suggestion for the government to allow to give journalists some money to be able to do these kinds of jobs, because certainly our own newspapers and media outlets don't have that kind of money. All that money goes to the CEOs. So my project was to look at the state of mental health in Rwanda 20 years after the genocide. And in particular, what I was interested in is the next generation, the kids that were born during or shortly after the genocide, who would be turning 20 years old. And what I discovered was an entire group of the population, despite what things look like on the surface in Rwanda. I mean, in many ways, it's a success story in Africa, partly due to a mini dictatorship of Kagame. He can be criticized, but he certainly can be criticized, but he's done a lot to rebuild the country. And so it seems to be, on the surface, it's clean, people are working, things are developing. But if you scratch that surface, what you discover is a very troubled population. And so some of the kids I talked to had been born after their mothers had been raped during the genocide. And as you probably know, rape was used as a weapon during the killings in those 100 days of 1994. But what I found was that the treatment or the care of these young people is quite spotty. If they were lucky enough to fall into the hands of a small NGO, say from the States or even a local one, they were able to get some kind of therapy or someone to pay for their university education. And others who had grown up with these very, very damaged mothers were also extremely damaged themselves. One young woman I interviewed, Angelique, well, I was interviewing her mother, and her mother described what had happened to her during the genocide, and she just had this horrible, traumatic reaction as she told me her story. And her daughter, who had been born through one of these rapes, just sat there completely cold, was not able to react to her mother's pain. So both of them were very much in pain. And you could tell that, I mean, I don't think it would take that much. I think they just need people to talk to. And there was a young man, very impressive young man from Rwanda, who has started an organization called Best Hope Rwanda. And I've kept in touch with him, and he's forever looking for funding and help because he sees in these women and their children, well, now adult children, people who are in need of support, both psychologically and in some ways financially, well, in many ways financially, but mostly psychological. So he has started sort of this group therapy session, and he has really no experience himself or expertise, but he just brings these women together with their kids and lets them talk, which seems to be extremely helpful for them. another group that is started, it's a sort of an American, a Rwandan American, or American Rwandan, who started a group called Step Up. She got into the country quite a while ago, sort of early on after the genocide, and you can tell that the women that her organization has helped are much further along than some of the others that I met. They've created a group where they support each other, where they keep bees, and they have a sewing cooperative. So they have a way of supporting themselves economically. One of the main problems with the kids born from rape is they're not recognized by the government as victims or survivors of the genocide. So that's a huge issue. They're seen as the offspring of Hutus or the génocidaire, or, the enemy. So they didn't qualify for any kind of educational benefit. So one of the big gaps that I saw, and I think that would help, is funding their post-secondary or even their secondary education. In terms of in terms of other countries that Canada could be helping, when, as we all know, rape is a weapon of war. It's happening in Congo, in Syria, any place, I guess, that there's war. Even if there's not war, it tends to be a big issue. But there's certainly need for psychological support in Rwanda. They only have 6 psychologists for the entire country, or psychiatrists, sorry. And there's a lot of groups trying, and local people, local Rwandans, trying to create more support on where, people can just get together and talk about what they've been through. It seems like part of the government's goal in many ways is to sort of bury the past and move on and declare that we're all Rwandans now, or we're not Hutus and Tutsis. But that just sort of denies a lot of the suffering that people experienced. So, I mean, I'm not an expert on the field at all. I went there, I spent about 6 weeks to 2 months talking to people, which isn't easy because there's a huge issue of trust. Nobody trusts anyone in Rwanda, and that's probably why there's no corruption, because nobody knows, you don't know exactly who it is you're dealing with, so you wouldn't dare bribe the person because they might turn you in. So that's something maybe we could use in Quebec a little bit more. Yeah, I mean, so I spent a lot of time talking to people, listening to their pain. 20 years after, it's, there's a lot of problems, and now they're starting to see in this next generation that never dealt with their pain, and especially among the kids of rape, drug abuse and alcoholism, which it had never been part of their culture before. So that's an unfortunate thing, partly probably because of their depression, but also because they really don't have anything to do, because nobody can pay for their education. So those were my observations. I don't know, maybe it's better if you ask some questions. And
all right. Well, thank you. That's very concise. Not all of our presenters are as self-disciplined as you have been, and members of the committee will know what I'm talking about. So you've used up, we're at 15 minutes. We should have time for 7-minute question and answer rounds. As always, I encourage our committee members to keep the questions short so the answers can be long. Mr. Sweet.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks, Ms. Montgomery. Your frankness is refreshing. It was staggering. You mentioned 6 psychiatrists for 12 million people. There's shortage here of psychiatrists and psychologists to really look after the entire population, but nowhere near 6 for 12 million. Since you were on the ground recently, I just wanted to ask you, do you have any sense of the numbers that we have are the 20,000 offspring that were born from these hundreds of thousands of rapes? Is that close to accurate? Do you have any feeling for that, for the amount of time that you've spent there?
Yeah, that's the number I have as well, is 20,000. I mean, I certainly didn't see all 20,000, but the villages I did visit and meet with these people, it was quite a large group each time. So, that seems to be the accepted number. Of course, it's always impossible to know. They even argue over how many were killed during the genocide. So,
yeah. The CV that we have in regards to your background, you actually, over the years of dealing with this subject, have almost acted in a pastoral way in a confessional way with some of the women that have gone through this trauma. Can you give us an idea about the kinds of things that you've heard from them, obviously anonymously, but just the kinds of things that they share with you?
The women in Rwanda?
The women that have suffered the rapes and have had offspring.
Well, for example, one woman that I met with who was actually doing quite well, she, her husband had been killed, and she was taken, I guess, hostage or taken as a prisoner by the Hutus, and was repeatedly raped while her 5-year-old daughter was raped in the next room. And she could hear the daughter being raped, and that happened often, where the child was raped at the same time. And she couldn't stand to hear it anymore, so she escaped, because she said, which I found her reaction sort of unusual. I thought, if that were me, maybe I would try to save my child. But she said that she knew there was no way she could get near her child to save her. So the only thing she could do is run away from the screaming and the pain that she was going through. But when the genocide was over, they were reunited via one of the UN organizations, I guess, or the Red Cross. And the little girl was quite emaciated and very extremely injured internally, and so, I mean, you can imagine, she's been raped by adult men for over God knows how many days. And then the mother herself discovered that she was pregnant through one of her rapes. So here she is with a little girl who was raped repeatedly and is completely traumatized by that. She herself is traumatized, and now she's pregnant and going to have a child. So I met with them, and the child that was raped is now a young woman and is going to university. She didn't want to talk about what happened to her at all. She only spoke about her father, her dead father, in glowing terms. That's all she wanted to talk about. But her mother told me that she really hates men, and for many, many years she would hide under tables and make strange noises. And the son, who was born of rape, I mean, he's a lovely young man, and they've managed to create this little family of theirs with the help of one of the U.S. NGOs. And we're friends on Facebook now, so, and he takes selfies all the time. But the problem with him is he doesn't have anyone to fund his education, because he's not a victim of the genocide, which I find really unfortunate. I mean, he's a very bright, lovely young man, and if I had the funds, I would send him to university, but,
On that subject, one of the things that you said was that when you were there for the 6 weeks, on the outside, it seemed like everything was fine, but when you scratched the surface, you saw there was a lot of, and one of the things that surprised me, particularly because I just came from a Holocaust memorial event, is that you said that they're trying to bury this whole thing. So there's no effort at remembrance so that it doesn't happen again or anything. Is that, or is it?
No, maybe I was a bit harsh, but they have their memorials every year. and the line is, we're all Rwandans. So there's no, so everybody repeats that by rote, but there's still these divisions because certain things haven't been dealt with. Like, there are many Hutus that were killed, but not participated in the genocide. And they feel that, they suffered as well, but they're not allowed to suffer. I mean, the names Hutu and Tutsi are very loaded. If you're Tutsi, you were a victim. If you're Hutu, you were the génocidaire. But they don't want to talk about that. And any kind of talk that brings up these divisions is against the law. There are people in jail for, talking like this. So when you talk about it, you have to do it in very hushed tones. They're very uncomfortable. Although there's one MP who I interviewed who is great, and he sort of started this reconciliation road show where he goes around. He's only 30, and he gets together young Tutsis and Hutus to talk about what's happening. So because he's an elected minister, he's able to get away with this, and he's sort of like the youth minister. So things seem to be opening up a bit because it's like it really is the elephant in the room, and if they don't address it, I think it's going to explode again. There's a lot of resentment and anger still. So it's not so much that they just want to put the past behind them, but Kagame and so on, as you know, as you may know, he likes to get rid of any kind of dissent, and unfortunately, and he just wants to forge ahead and get away from the country being identified as the country where there was the genocide. So.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Are we turning out to Mr. Marsden or Mr. Benskin in this case? Mr. Marsden, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you, Chair. And I want to say, Ms. Montgomery, that I agree with your conversation when you first started talking about training journalists, because journalists in many ways are the conscience of countries, especially that have gone through this type of horrific set of events. PTSD is something that's just started to become conversation in North America. I've had it for 40 years. I was a signal maintainer, took care of railway crossings. I had 4 fatalities in one crossing in 11 months. To this day, 40 years later, I have a reoccurring dream. About every month, I'm standing before my supervisor trying to explain why I had not tested the crossing appropriately. Actually, I had, but so here I was, totally innocent, and I still pay that. Now, the advantage I had was to be able to discuss it with co-workers and other people. And when I look at this situation, as you talked about that peer-to-peer counseling that happens, or conversation, and somebody facilitating that, and you mentioned an American NGO that was doing some work around that, it strikes me that there's 2 levels to this. We marked the anniversary of Rwanda in Hamilton, and one young man spoke, and he was one of the 20-somethings. How many people, or do you have an idea of how many of these victims are in Canada? And is that not something that we should be providing here as well as over there? And do you see a particular NGO that might be worthy of the Canadian government helping to facilitate it in Rwanda?
To answer your first question, there are a lot of survivors here in Canada, mostly in Montreal because of the French. And I'm friends with a number of them. They seem to be, I think in a way they do better when they're here because they're not reminded of it all the time. And they're kept busy just trying to establish their life here. That's my sense anyway. I'm sure some of them have their moments of trauma. In terms of NGOs in Rwanda, it's difficult because the Rwandan government, which I think is a good thing, they've been very strict about which NGOs can operate in Rwanda, which compared to Haiti, maybe Haiti could take a lesson from that. So they're trying very hard to keep it homegrown, culturally sensitive. So they don't want NGOs coming in and just telling them what to do and how to do it. And I respect that, and I think it's a good thing. There is one woman that I'm aware of who's working on her master's in public health who I would definitely support in her efforts. I'm just trying to find it. I can. Yeah, she started an NGO called Living with Happiness, and the priority is, you know, she said the problem with their government in dealing with this is that they're very institutional and very, you know, they want studies, they want statistics, they want, I guess all governments want that, but, you know, there's very little sort of hands-on. And she said not only do they need help for the people who are suffering, but they also need help for the caregivers. Like her goal would be to have a place in the country, and she actually has the land for it that she inherited. Like both her parents were killed in the genocide. Her whole family actually was killed. She just managed to escape by luck, but she was raped. But she would like to establish a place where people could go and, you know, paint or tell a story. It's a very oral culture. You know, doing some kind of therapy that way. I don't think the kind of traditional therapy that we might see here where you go to see a psychologist for 50 minutes and lie on a couch, I don't think that would work there.
No, that's why I mentioned peer-to-peer.
Yeah.
It's a national event. It's not quite the same as an individual event here and we may have in this country, like an assault
right.
or whatever. And so my concern around this is if you've got a government that I won't say they are in denial, but they certainly are trying to push it aside to address the initial victims of the rapes. That's one level of the peer-to-peer contact and allow them to get out. The little girl you described that was under the table, until you talk them out from under that table, there's no end to this for them, is one level. But now the survivors, the children who are in their 20s now, they're going to have a whole different kind, they're going to have an institutional problem like education-wise and that. But they still are going to have the residual effects of the trauma that they lived through just observing their mothers and how they survived.
Well, and then they risk passing it on to their,
exactly,
like we've seen with Holocaust survivors. It goes on probably 3 or 4 generations.
No, I agree. I've met people who are grandchildren of victims of Auschwitz, and it's an entirely different conversation that you have with them. And their reality is different, and the reality of the people on the ground in Rwanda is very different. Again, coming back to Canada, have you heard of any groups in Canada that are doing direct support?
In Canada here with survivors? Well, I know that we used to have, the government used to provide psychological services for newcomers, new refugees, but I think that's been cut. Like a lot of services, but I don't know. I think survivors here that are looking for psychological support have to go through the same channels as the rest of us.
I would presume, or they're in Quebec, that the Quebec health system has probably got something to help them manage it.
But there are organizations in Quebec, for example, Page Rwanda helps. You know, what they've done is they've brought all the survivors together and videotaped their experiences and established sort of a library in Montreal of all the experiences. So, I mean, all it is a room in some building, but you can go and listen to all the stories. And I think every once in a while they'll have sort of a little informal conference or something where they get together and talk about it.
But it makes them feel of value to be able to express that story, which is a critical component. How's my time, Mr. Chair?
It's actually just run out.
Thank you. I had that feeling.
People have internal clocks that are surprisingly accurate, I notice. Ms. Grewal, you're next.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Mrs. Montgomery, for taking your time to speak with us today regarding the aftermath of the Rwandan genocide and your time and effort involving in improving the lives of those who were affected. Well, during your time in Rwanda, you observed that the children who were born from this tragedy and noted that the mothers, they have a palpable disgust for these children and seek to disassociate with them from them in all aspects of their life. So these children, now they are adults and are experiencing feelings of rejection and are unsure what to do in their life. And based, your account in the Montreal Gazette, you explain that there are few mental issues, health issues with them, and health workers are not available. So in your opinion, how can these children improve their life, and are there other resources available to them besides the aid workers?
Well, I would say that the best way to improve their lives is through education. I mean, every single one of them I talked to, and not just the children of rape, but the orphans of the genocide too, want to go to school. They would love to go to university and get an education, but there's just not the funding for it. There was funding for like I said, some victims of the genocide, and there was an orphans fund, but that didn't cover the Hutus or the kids born of rape, which again causes the conflict between the two groups. So to me, that every single one of them that I spoke to, when I said, what would help you, what would you like, they said they wanted to go to school, but there's no money for it. So, so it makes you feel a little bit helpless, actually.
Well, seeing how the aid workers, they tend to focus more on the women who were raped rather than the children who were conceived from rape. So how are these almost 20,000 young adults, they were taken into account. So are they needing more resources now that they are older and compared to when they were first born?
Well, I would say yes, because some of them have never received any kind of psychological support, so they could use some therapy, which is what my friend Gansa is trying to do, who's Rwandan, with his Best Hope Rwanda, and bringing the women and their kids together to talk about how they're feeling. I was at one of their meetings, and there was a government official that showed up at it, and so I said, what about this group of people? What's the government doing for them? And he said that he said, we thought we had offered support to widows and children, but I guess these ones just kind of fell through the cracks. He seemed to be a bit oblivious that there was this group that hadn't been taken care of. I mean, you have to realize that the country was completely destroyed, of course. There was no functioning government. There were no homes. There was nothing. So psychological help was kind of like the last thing on the list, and it still is. And even when I spoke to the representative in Kigali from the WHO, he said it's a worldwide problem. And unfortunately, it's at the bottom of the list for funding because it's very hard to provide the numbers of who's dying. At least with AIDS or even Ebola, you can say, we have this many people who are dead. We don't know how many people are dying because of mental health issues in Rwanda. So, and it's also a cultural thing, right? They're just starting to understand in Rwanda that this is an issue because there's been a lack of education, like there is here, in terms of mental health. So they kind of treat people who walk through the streets barefoot and talking to themselves as like, obsessed or possessed, by the devil or whatever, right? So there's now an increasing understanding about depression and mental health.
Well, rape as a weapon of war is deplorable, so I couldn't help but feel for these women as I heard about their traumatic experiences. And I would also like to inquire about mothers who have not informed their children that they were conceived due to rape. So the difficulties with informing your child that the father was involved in a heinous crime, often killing much of their mother's family, would be numerous. And a large number of women have chosen not to tell their children. So the circumstances around their conception, how are these children responding psychologically compared with their counterparts, and that they were informed about the rape of their mothers? And how would these children respond upon discovering the circumstances of their conception? And would it bring reconciliation, or would it kind of cause anger?
Well, one of the groups I spoke to who, they support some of these people too. Like I said, it's all very ad hoc and not very organized in terms of groups working together. So there'll be a group helping a group of people, and then in another part of the country there won't be any help at all. But they said that of the 800 or so that they help, they helped 819 Rwandan women who gave birth after being raped. And of those, only 50 have revealed the truth to their children. And he said it's a very difficult thing to do because their reactions are different. Some of them denied that they were even Rwandan after that, like took on this persona of being Ugandan, stopped speaking Kinyarwanda. Another one, he said, a woman became a prostitute. Some turned very violent. So I think that's something that needs to be done sort of in a controlled environment by professionals with support. Because I think the kids do need to know where they came from and who their father was. And there needs to be told to them in a way that it wasn't their fault and there's no shame attached to it. But the problem is they were born with this huge cloud of shame over their mother's heads. I mean, any woman who's raped carries this shame and guilt, and let alone if you have to give birth because of it, So I think it's a two-pronged thing. But definitely that's another area that needs to be addressed in terms of informing the kids where they came from.
Thank you. I'm afraid that's all the time you have. We're actually a minute and a half over on your round. Mr. Vaughan, please.
I'm curious as to where you encountered Canadian aid and where you saw Canadian aid being effective in dealing with the issues you brought to us today.
In Rwanda?
Yeah.
I don't think I saw any. I don't think Rwanda is one of Canada's core countries or focus countries. So I don't know what the key word is now. I'm sure there must be some Canadians there, but like I said, Rwanda is the kind of country where for example, their health minister is this rock star who is an amazing woman. And I called her up and said, I would like to speak to some NGOs that are working in the area of mental health, such as Partners in Health. And she went crazy on me. She was so angry. She said, why do you want to speak to a foreign NGO? And we have all kinds of local NGOs that are much better to speak to and know the situation. I said, okay, I'm open to speak to anybody. I just want to talk to people who are working in the area of mental health. And it turned out the people that I spoke to, the Rwandans, were extremely well-informed and, obviously knew the situation better than outsiders coming in. So I didn't encounter a lot of Canadians there. I don't think I encountered any. Maybe one guy that had gone there on his own, who was a psychologist or psychiatrist. And, but I think that's probably partly because of the Rwandans, tight controls of who works there.
And in terms of, on the domestic front, we know that recent studies are showing that refugees and immigrants that arrive in Canada, their mental health declines after arrival in Canada precisely because of the withdrawal of services, in particular for refugees, but also for many immigrants to this country. Where is the government's response to those people who we have accepted as refugees, and what programs are being specifically delivered to a very unique set of refugees here?
Here in Canada? I'm not that familiar with that, but I have done some stories in the past with the psychological services, support services being cut. And in fact, I knew I work at the courthouse full time, and one of the security guards there is a Rwandan woman who I got talking to. And she said that she had been getting therapy, but that it had been cut. So, whether that's true or not, I believe her. I have no reason not to believe her. And then I didn't see her again at the courthouse. I don't know what happened, if she lost her job or she quit her job or changed jobs. I don't know. I lost touch with her. But I definitely think, often I see homeless people on the street, and maybe this is sort of a racist thing on my part, but if they're people of color or black, I automatically assume that they were refugees that came here and got lost in the system somehow. A lot of them are Africans, and I kind of wonder, is that what happens, that they don't get the psychological support or they don't have the family support they need? One of my friends came here from Rwanda to study, do his master's in journalism at Carleton, and he ended up having a psychological episode on the streets of Toronto, in a bus, actually, where the police had to be called. And I was very grateful that they didn't shoot him, which we know can happen. He ended up being diagnosed as bipolar here and went back to Rwanda and continues to have psychological difficulties. So I do think that if we're going to accept refugees here from countries that have been torn apart by war, and right now we're accepting a lot of Syrians who are escaping exactly that, I think we owe it to them to provide psychological support, at least somebody that they can talk to about what they're going through.
In terms of what you have experienced is that the programs that brought this news to us, the programs that funded overseas excursions by journalists to explore the world and bring us back this information, in terms of the cuts you've seen in terms of foreign aid to Rwanda from the Canadian government, and then matched with movements today to withdraw services voluntarily or by suggestion for refugees. Is there anything that we're doing that is supporting a brighter future for these individuals?
Or abroad?
Here. It seems that every single program you spoke of, there's a retreat on behalf of the government. Is there anything we're doing where we're stepping up and delivering?
I don't think it's a secret that this government has cut everything, or many things. Unfortunately, and we tend to support, aid countries that have something that we need, such as oil. So in the case of Rwanda, what do they have? They have nothing. So, any journalism thing that I've ever done via some kind of government support, such as teaching in Rwanda at the university, that's been cut. The CIHR, I was the last journalist to get that fellowship, it's been cut. It was only $25,000. There's only one foreign fellowship now, which was set up by the family of a former journalist, Jim Travers, who died, and his family set that up. So it's very, very difficult to go into these countries and report on important issues like this. And it's very difficult to see refugees who come here or immigrants who come here and are struck by the reality of what it's like to live here. It's not easy. And anytime I travel to places like Rwanda, of course, a lot of people want to come to Canada because they think it's the best place on earth to live. But if you're not educated and you're black and you're poor, it's a struggle.
If we were to...
Sorry, Mr. Vaughan, we actually have, we're at 7 minutes, 20 seconds, so I have to go to our next questioner, which is, as I understand it, Mr. Sweet.
Thank you, Chair. I'm just going to give it to my colleague, Mr. Hillier, to ask some questions, but I do want to clarify a few things. That Canada has a reputation and continues to have a reputation of per capita taking more United Nations High Commission refugees than any other country in the world. I know in the community that I live in, Hamilton, Ontario, we invest millions of dollars. When I say we, the federal government invests millions of dollars in settlement services for refugees as well as for immigrants in regards to all kinds of services, medical, psychological, language, employment opportunities, etc. I was last year on the border of Jordan and Syria, where we've committed to take more refugees from. And by the way, 60% of those will be coming in on a very amazing program called the Private Sponsorship of Refugees, which means the communities actually get involved with the government and assist them. And so many of them have access to pastoral counseling and psychological help in the communities that they'll be in. But I was on the border there and was with the Royal Jordanian Guard, and they informed me that of all of the countries that made a commitment to help Jordan actually handle the huge refugee crisis that they have, at that time the only country that had lived up to their promise was Canada, to purchase some water trucks, some trucks to transport refugees from the border in order to get them to the camps, to assist them psychologically and mentally, for security, because a lot of Al-Qaeda and ISIS were actually trying to get across the border. And the Brigadier General that was briefing us was profoundly grateful. In fact, he said, Canadians we know are our friends. So I just wanted to put that on the record to be clear regarding the investments that the Government of Canada is making on behalf of all Canadian citizens in regards to refugees, really everywhere. But I would say one more thing too, that as all free countries, we have a challenge between those who are asylum seekers and those who are United Nations High Commission refugees. And we invest millions of dollars in security screening to make sure that we keep Canadians safe as well for those who land in our country, whose identification we can't readily confirm. In fact, on some occasions, they actually destroy their documents. And we go through all kinds of efforts to make sure that legitimate refugees have a safe haven, but also, just as importantly, or maybe even more importantly, because we are a Canadian government, to make sure that all necessary security screening is done to assure that Canadian citizens are kept safe. So I just wanted to make sure that that was on the record amongst the other comments that were made, and I'll give the rest of the time to my colleague, Mr. Hillier, to ask any questions.
Which is how much?
You have, Mr. Hillier, you have 3 minutes and 30 seconds.
25 seconds. Okay. Thank you for coming. And I know that's the focus of this study. This is my first day on this new subcommittee, but I know that it is on, it has been on, dealing with the children of rape from the Rwandan genocide. But I wonder if you can, with your experience, if you can comment a little bit about the genocide itself. As you know, after World War II, the United Nations made their Never Again declaration, where they'd never let a genocide happen again. And I remember writing a paper for a master's degree. I called it Never Again and Again and Again and Again, because when it happened in Rwanda, when it happened in Cambodia, the international community made a conscious decision not to call it genocide until a couple years after. But I wonder if you can, now 1.5 minutes, I guess, say anything about what we can do to not just help deal with the after effects of a crisis like this, but is there anything that we can do to help prevent a crisis like this?
Yikes.
Yeah, solve it.
Well, geez. I think it just comes down to, you know, a lot of this, a lot of these hatreds between peoples comes from ignorance and lack of education. So I suppose one thing Canada can do is support education around the world. And I guess, you know, I mean, listen to the warning signs. I mean, we knew what was going on in Rwanda, but we didn't really seem to care. I don't know what else to say other than that. I really, but I think it just comes down to educating people.
And would you say that helping deal with the particular crisis of the children of rape, if we don't deal with it, it could lead to more tensions again and more, like you talked about, that they're hushing everything up, and so it's just building up tension again. Maybe we're not looking at a genocide, but more violence.
Yeah, well, I mean, we already see that it's flown over into the Congo. Like, that's where the SDIR are, and there's skirmishes across the border all the time. So yeah, it could, for sure, it could happen again. It wouldn't surprise me.
Okay, thanks.
All right, thank you very much. We'll conclude with Mr. Benskin.
Thank you, and thank you, Ms. Montgomery, for finding the time to join us. One of the things that I was keen on when we decided to do this study was, unfortunately, if one is cold about it, unfortunately, this generation that this has happened to, unless we can do things like fund post-secondary education and so forth, and find other ways to help them help them deal with their own PTSD, this generation is kind of lost. And one of the reasons why I think this discussion is important is because this type of action is still happening. It's happening in Syria. It's happening in DRC. And my interest is basically taking lessons from this in the same way that we've learned through through Holocaust Memorial. We've learned that there are signs. We've learned that there are things that we have to be aware of. And as long as we keep it in the consciousness through the Truth and Reconciliation process in South Africa, we've learned that as long as we keep these events alive and in the minds, it helps prevent this type of thing happening again, which seems to be the antithesis of what is happening in Rwanda now. But in terms of creating and aiding in helping individuals prepare for what is to come in the aftermath of Syria, in the aftermath of the DRC, as part of our arsenal in terms of aid, what would be the key things that you feel we would need to learn about, irregardless of the cultural differences, because cultural differences are important, but we are human beings and we are all affected by things exactly the same way. How we respond to it is where the cultural differences come into play. How can we be of better help in helping the countries of the future and the communities of the future deal with this type of violence?
Well, I mean, in the Congo, if it ever ends, the conflict there, it just seems to go on and on and on, and I don't know how many millions of people have been killed, not to mention people raped. Like I said, I think that there are a lot of, like, I'm very impressed with a lot of the people in Rwanda who are working on this issue, Rwandans, and who have done some studying abroad and who understand the issues and understand what needs to be done. I think as many of these problems, as often is the case, there's not enough money, so I think supporting local groups, the grassroots groups, and what they're doing is the best thing that we could do. I don't think sending in professionals who may or may not understand the cultural situation is going to help. I think it's better to partner with people who are doing that work in the country and support them any way that they need it, whether that means training or financial things, or like just even having a venue for people to meet in. I think is one of the things they need in Rwanda, for example, is just a place to meet and materials.
Well, I mean, I agree wholeheartedly. One of the things that we have been hearing that has been successful has been, for example, with Hope Ethiopia, where they were talking about the work that they were doing, bringing children and their mothers together and bringing those families together, where they're actually creating their own family units within that shared experience, which is giving them support. So from what I'm gathering, facilitating that type of activity, not necessarily, sending our viewpoint or our psychologists to there, but training people in mental health services, but with the understanding, with the cultural aspect or the cultural understanding of that community or that country.
Mm-hmm. In fact, one of the Canadians, you were asking me if I'd met any Canadians who were doing work there. One of the guys I met was actually with Hope Ethiopia, but in Rwanda, and he found it very, very difficult, partly because of the trust issue. It takes a long time, and that's the problem with sending outsiders in to the situation. If they don't know you, or they don't know where you came from or what you're doing there, they're not going to open up to you. So I was lucky in that sense that I had been there in 2006, 2007 teaching, and so I had made a lot of contacts, and I was able to get people to open up to me because they trusted me. But that takes a long time, especially if you're in a war-like situation, So I fully support Canada's role in partnering with people who are working on these kinds of things. Like a lot of the Rwandans said to me, is there a way I can do a stage or something in a rehab center here, for example, in Canada? But I have no idea. Those are things that I really don't know. I mean, other than writing to the people and asking, I don't know. They really are hungry for information. It's not like they need to learn about what people are going through. They know that because they're all going through it. But they need to learn different ways of dealing with it. And they have a lot of creative ideas of how to deal with it. They just need the resources. And I don't think it takes a lot. We're not talking like millions and millions of dollars. I don't think it takes a lot of money to provide things like, say, they just want material to paint or things to do sculpture or any other kind of creative materials.
Why don't you, since these hearings are held at your suggestion, why don't we do one more for you, Mr. Benskin?
Thank you. You had mentioned that substance abuse, and this is not the first time we've heard this, substance abuse and prostitution. A lot of these children find their way to this method of either hiding or living, or dulling the pain. And for me, it struck me as this is again one of the things that we can do is sort of collate the type of reaction to expect from in these other countries. These are the type of reactions that are going to happen with these children, with these these women who have been raped during the process of crisis. Here are here is the information. Here are ways in which we can help you, get that information and process that information, and you can then take that and go and work with your communities in making those communities aware and helping them deal with that. Again, would that be something that would?
So, like for example, they've just opened their very first chapter of AA in Rwanda. Alcohol's Anonymous, because they've never needed it before. I mean, they're not in their culture they drink milk. So this has become an issue in this next generation. So they're having to address it now. So that's one of the psychologists I talked to is working at the newly opened psychiatric wing or a rehabilitation wing of a hospital. And he said, we have AA meetings now. Like, they never had that before. So that kind of information too, sharing, like, how we deal with it. But let's face it, I mean, it's the same issue in Canada. I mean, a lot of the problems, mental health problems we have, stem from trauma people experience as children. We have a lot of abuse here, and a lot of sexual abuse and physical abuse and psychological abuse that's swept under the table. And I'm sure that if we started addressing that head on, there wouldn't be as much mental health, as many mental health cases as we have now.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Ms. Montgomery. You've been very helpful to us. I'd actually intended to ask a question myself, but I think you helped us to answer it. Something came out of Mr. Benskin's questions. I did want to ask, you said people have mentioned to you, so I gather this has happened more than once, about coming here for what you call a stage. Just help me, that means essentially an internship of some sort at a...
Yeah, like this one psychologist who I am just so impressed by. He asked me a number of times, and he has no interest in coming to live here. He wants to just come and, like, he's the one who works with in the drug and alcohol rehabilitation, and because it's so new, he doesn't really know a lot about it. So he would really like to just spend some time. Like, one of the places I was thinking of is, I see when I cover courts, a lot of people are ordered to go to a rehab center in Montreal or Quebec or something. And I thought that would be a good place for him to spend some time, just to observe how the counseling is done. It was kind of interesting when I was there talking to him. He had a Rwandan father show up with his kid from Edmonton, because they couldn't get proper care in Edmonton. Like, this kid was out of control. He was taking drugs and drinking and so on. So the father thought it would be good to take him to Rwanda, where there wasn't any of these problems. But when I met the kid and his dad, like, the kid. I mean, he was like over 6 feet tall, you know, he was like one of these big 18-year-olds. I mean, or 16-year-olds. He was drunk when I met him. So, I mean, he had obviously found a way to get this stuff in Rwanda. But I just kind of found it ironic that here's this father bringing his kid from a first world country to a third world country to get him over his addiction. So, yeah, so this psychologist who has studied in England actually, would love to find a way to learn more about addiction.
All right, that's helpful. Essentially, there's some expertise here that they could use there, and this is one way of transferring the expertise over is to allow some kind of internships or
right.
Thing. Okay.
So it's just basically how do you make those connections? How do you make those partnerships? You know.
Okay, that's very, very helpful. Thank you. Thank you to all of our colleagues, and Ms. Montgomery, we really do appreciate you coming in here. This has been,
Thank you for inviting.
I think we've all found it very useful.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Colleagues, just for my certainty, could I speak to Mr. Benskin and Mr. Vaughn after we adjourn this? I was going to go in camera, but I think this will work better. It's a matter not related to Rwanda. Thank you.